Sharif, you did a number of stories where we interviewed Anas al-Sharif. We published, for more than a year, we've published his warnings that Israel was going to kill him and his descriptions of what it was like. First of all, share your reaction to this assassination, but also the details of this strike that Israel conducted that assassinated Anas and 5 other journalists.
Well, it was news that was very difficult to absorb and comprehend. As you mentioned, this journalist had really become this recognizable face across the world, internationally, online, on screens across the Arab world, but also really across the globe, who has endured so much, who stood out as a symbol for other Palestinian journalists, who was repeatedly threatened and voiced and would say he's being threatened and called on the world to protect him and to protect other journalists. That, you know, what he expected to happen happened because the world didn't protect him. You just read this letter. These are 20-year-olds, journalists in their 20s, writing letters knowing that they most probably will be killed. What kind of world are we living in where this is the case, and then their words are read out? When we spoke to him back in September, one of the questions was, why do you keep doing this, despite the threats, despite the difficulties? And of course, they're enduring all the horror of the genocide that they're covering as well. And he said, maybe the world won't act, maybe the world won't help us, but there might be a motive to stop this war. Every time I document a massacre or event or bombing, I think that maybe through this bombing or this image, that the war could stop and the war would end. This has driven us to continue in our coverage to our last breath. And he did that to his last breath. And as soon as news broke of his killing, and let's remember, the Israelis assassinated him, bragged about it afterwards openly. They are able to do this because there has been zero consequences for the over 238 journalists who have been killed so far, a record number. And they massacred 6 journalists in that single strike, and their names are important. There's Anas al-Sharif and 4 others from Al Jazeera: Mohammed Qareka, Ibrahim Zahir, Mu'min Alawa, Mohammed Nufal, and one from the media outlet Sahat, Mohammed Al-Khaladi. All of those voices have been silenced. They were killed. And as soon as this happened, I contacted the journalist that we work with very closely now in Gaza City, and Leila has worked with as well, at Fault Lines, Abdel Qadir Sabbah, who is an incredible journalist, who's very close to Anas al-Sharif. He was close to Hossam Shabat. He was close to Ismail al-Ghul, all these journalists who have been killed. He said he had been with Anas just 2 days before, helping him to set up a live shot, speaking with him. And as Israel's preparing to invade Gaza City, as the threats were ramping up against not just Anas, Abdel Qadir said the threats are coming in to all of them. He said, we understand these are our last days, that they most likely will be killed. And I messaged him as soon as the news broke. He had run to the site. We posted his video at Drop Site. It is very difficult to watch. He's filming as he approaches the site, as he's finding out that his colleagues have been killed. All his journalist colleagues are screaming. And yeah, I think the fact that the coverage, and we'll talk about this in more detail, of these killings has been so problematic and is still so problematic, is really beyond comprehension. And I'll just say one final thing. In addition to the sheer abhorrence of massacring 6 journalists in a single strike, the effect on what we know, or what the world will know about what is happening in Gaza every time a journalist killed, is immeasurable. But it's not just the loss of that journalist's heroic work. There are ripple effects. Journalists, especially in war zones, rely on each other. and support each other and bolster each other. It's the only way you can operate in these environments. Journalism is a collaborative and collective effort. You've reported from war zones, Leila has as well. We all know this. Now, Gaza is much more than a war zone. It's an active genocide. And the strength and bravery it takes to continue reporting from in this kind of environment is beyond measure. But every time Israel murders another Palestinian journalist, we lose not just their voice, but it reverberates across the journalistic community in ways that we cannot know. The loss of a colleague. Abdel Kouddous and others have said they're determined not to stop reporting, not to let Israel. They know that Israel is doing this to try and silence all journalists, and they're very bravely continuing their work. But how can we let this happen? How long can the richest and most powerful media institutions in the world continue to belittle their sacrifice, justify their killings, and diminish their worth? And this is something we all have to fight against. It's infuriating, and I continue to be shocked. I shouldn't be at this point. None of us should be, but it is just continues to be shocking. The coverage, we can dig into the details of this, and the coverage, for example, by Reuters. Okay, Anas Sharif was part of a Reuters team that was awarded the Pulitzer Prize for photography in 2024. One of the photos in the submission is a photo by Anas of a 2,000-pound bomb that hit Jabalia. Okay, and you see the crater, and it's this incredible, horrific photo. Reuters coverage of his killing, the headline is Israel kills Al Jazeera journalist it says was Hamas leader. And then it front loads Israel's justification for killing Anas in the lead. And the New York Times piece about Al Jazeera does this too. In the first sentence, it frames the refutation of Anas being a terrorist that Al Jazeera denies it. Not that there's no credible evidence to support it, not that the UN, not that the world's leading press watchdog groups like CPJ or all other journalists, credible journalists deny it, just that Al Jazeera denies it. So it becomes this he said, she said scenario, and this is how it's covered, and this is how it's framed. And, there's that old story of, the job of a journalist, if you're sitting in a room and two people are discussing the weather and one says it's raining and the other says it's not raining, the job of the journalist is not to print those two statements and say one says it's raining, one says it's not raining. The job of the journalist is to look out the window and then expose the one that's lying. But this is what all of these journalistic outlets are doing. That New York Times piece, I'm going to read just a quote from it. It says, the Israeli military last year accused 6 Al Jazeera journalists, including Anas Sharif, whom Israel said it had targeted in its attack on Gaza City on Sunday, of being fighters with Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad, another militant group. The military has showed documents purporting to prove those ties, which the New York Times has not independently verified. That's all they say about it. The New York Times has not independently verified these documents that have been proven to be false by CPJ, by the UN, if you just look at them, they're ridiculous. Israel doesn't even make much of an effort with these documents. They justified the killing of Ismail al-Ghul, who was decapitated in an airstrike last July 2024. They said that after the fact that he was a Hamas militant, that he received a military ranking in 2007, when Ismail al-Ghul was 10 years old. This is how absurd their claims are. There should be a disclaimer on anything the Israeli military is claiming. And yes, this has allowed for Israel to continue not only its genocidal assaults, but to assassinate journalists openly, brag about it later. They don't even have to try and cover it up as they used to. And this is what's happening. These media outlets are not forced to do this. They are choosing to do this. When we think about journalism and we think about Palestine, I think these two things are so intimately intertwined in the way we think about power. If we think about Israel as the most naked form of imperialist capitalist power, of colonial power, of like the future that awaits all of us with its algorithms and its walls and its killings and its apartheid. Future waits all of us if it's not resisted. And thinking of Palestine as the thing that has not been defeated yet and still exists, then journalism and the coverage of that reflects this, right? Journalism that promotes these types of things or covers Palestine, it gives Palestinians voices, is this form of resistance. And what I think we're seeing happen since the genocide began is it's become laid so bare. You know, people keep talking about how the post-World War II international order is falling apart because it's, you know, the gloves have always been off by Western powers, but now kind of the mask is off too. But it's really affecting also how people view the media in a very different way. There's always been skepticism of these media institutions, but there are literally like protests in front of the New York Times almost every week now. We all have friends who work at legacy media institutions, who are great journalists, who try and change it from within, and I think really do make an effort, and they do make a difference at these institutions, and sometimes they do get exemplary coverage in these important journalistic outlets. And I think we all applaud them for that. But I think we've reached a point where the editorial position on an institutional level of these media outlets is so corrupt and is so nakedly in service of power and establishment orthodoxy that we have to reject them on principle. There's a book by Omar Al-Ad, who worked himself as a journalist for many years. It's called One Day Everyone Will Have Always Been Against This. And he elucidates this point. He says, it's an admirable thing in a politics possessed of a moral floor to believe one can change the system from the inside, that with enough respectful prodding, the establishment can be made to bend like that famous arc toward justice. But when after decades of such thinking, decades of respectful prodding, the condition one arrives at is reticent acceptance of genocide, is it not at least worth considering that you are not changing the system nearly as much as the system is changing you? And I think that's so telling about when we think of journalism, that, you know, this system as the media exists in this country, I don't think anymore, I used to, I don't think anymore can be reformed. It needs to be dismantled and replaced because of what's happened. Yeah, so I don't know what you think the solution is, what you guys think the solution is, or how we can confront this, because it has to be confronted because it is enabling this murder to continue. Not just of journalists, but the entire project of Zionism and genocide to continue. It's also, I think, incumbent on us as journalists and just a people of conscience. It's difficult because the level of depravity and violence and brutality continues to reach new heights, that for us not to normalize certain things. For example, if you remember what was called the Flower Massacre in February of 2024, this was maybe the first mass killing of Palestinians, starving Palestinians trying to get food. It reverberated across, it actually made headlines everywhere. I think we were all extremely shocked. It is happening every single day now. Every single day. Starving Palestinians are shot while they're trying to get food. It's been happening since May 27th. And we have to fight against, because it's happening every day, that impulse that it's normal, that it's become a daily occurrence. And yeah, I think you're right. This whole campaign, it's an attempt to completely destroy Palestinian society, to make people also turn on each other. That's what starvation does. You end up cooking food and not giving it to your cousin because you have your kids to feed. This is part of this design, and it's happening before our eyes, and we're watching children die every day and adults die every day of starvation. So it's, yeah, and they're killing the witnesses.